The transmission crackled through the air, sharp and urgent, cutting through the silence of the command center. They do not sleep, they do not tire, they will not stop. The words hung heavy, a grim reminder of the enemy that had pushed humanity to the edge of annihilation. Outside, the sky burned with the fiery trails of Xenthari warships, their relentless bombardment shaking the ground beneath New Terra's last defenses. Commander Elena Voss stood at the edge of the observation deck, her eyes fixed on the chaos above. Her voice, steady and unyielding, broke through the tension. "We are the storm they cannot weather. We are the night that never ends." Around her, soldiers straightened, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten. The Xenthari had underestimated humanity's greatest strength, their refusal to surrender, their ability to endure without rest. As the alien fleet loomed closer, Elena's words echoed like a battle cry, a promise of defiance in the face of extinction. The stage was set, the final act of a century-long siege about to unfold. And in the shadows, the Xenthari's confidence began to waver, their once unshakable resolve cracking under the weight of humanity's relentless will. As the Xenthari fleet descended upon New Terra, the skies above humanity's last stronghold erupted in a storm of fire and destruction. Orbital bombardment rained down, shaking the ground and turning the horizon into a sea of flames. Amid the chaos, Commander Elena Voss moved with purpose, her mind racing to find a way to turn the tide. It was in the midst of this devastation that she intercepted a classified Xenthari transmission, a rare glimpse into the enemy's thoughts. The words were chilling, their wakefulness it defies nature. "They do not rest, they do not falter." For the first time, Elena saw a crack in the Xenthari's armor, their fear of humanity's sleepless endurance. With this revelation, a daring plan began to take shape in her mind. "If they fear our wakefulness," she declared to her officers, "then we'll weaponize it." The strategy was simple yet audacious. Strike at the Xenthari supply lines relentlessly, day and night, giving them no moment of respite. Her forces, though exhausted, rallied to the call. They launched a guerrilla campaign unlike anything the Xenthari had ever faced. Supply depots were hit under the cover of darkness, convoys ambushed in broad daylight, and communication hubs disrupted without warning. The aliens, accustomed to predictable patterns of warfare, found themselves overwhelmed by the unrelenting pace of humanity's assault. Kral'thar, the Xenthari commander, watched in growing frustration as his fleet struggled to adapt. "These humans," he growled to his subordinates, "they are not like the others, they do not tire, they do not falter." His once unshakable confidence began to waver as the toll of the endless attacks mounted. The Xenthari, a race that thrived on precision and order, found their carefully laid plans unraveling under the weight of humanity's relentless will. For the first time in a century, the tide of the siege began to turn. Elena's forces, emboldened by their successes, pressed the advantage. They struck with precision and ferocity, exploiting every weakness in the Xenthari's defenses. The aliens, unaccustomed to such unyielding pressure, began to show signs of strain. Their once coordinated attacks grew disjointed, their morale faltering under the constant barrage. As the days turned into weeks, the cracks in the Xenthari's resolve grew wider, and humanity's defiance began to shine like a beacon in the darkness. But Elena knew this was only the beginning. The Xenthari were a formidable enemy, and their retreat was far from assured. Yet, for the first time in 100 years, hope flickered on the horizon. A hope born from humanity's refusal to yield, their ability to endure where others would break. The Siege of New Terra was far from over, but the balance of power had shifted.
and in the shadows, the Xenthari's fear of humanity's sleepless endurance grew into something far more dangerous: doubt. As the chaos of the siege continued to unfold, a pivotal moment emerged, one that would redefine the course of the war. Elena's forces, operating under the cover of darkness, launched a daring ambush on a Xenthari command ship. The mission was risky, but the potential reward was too great to ignore. The strike was swift and precise, catching the aliens off guard. Amid the wreckage, humanity's soldiers uncovered a treasure trove of critical intelligence, detailed logs of the Xenthari's synchronized rest cycles. This was the breakthrough Elena had been waiting for. Among the wreckage, they also captured a Xenthari scientist, his once imposing demeanor now reduced to trembling fear. Under interrogation, he revealed the truth that would change everything. "Your sleeplessness," he stammered, "it disrupts our harmony, we cannot adapt. Our cycles are precise, our rest sacred. Without it, we falter." The words sent a ripple of realization through Elena's command center. Humanity's greatest strength, their ability to endure without rest, was the Xenthari's greatest weakness. Elena wasted no time. "If their rest is their vulnerability," she declared, "then we will exploit it without mercy." She ordered her troops to intensify their attacks, focusing on the precise moments when the Xenthari were most vulnerable during their synchronized rest periods. The strategy was brutal in its simplicity. Strike when the enemy was weakest and never let them recover. The Xenthari, accustomed to the predictability of their own cycles, found themselves unable to respond. Their once coordinated fleet began to fracture under the relentless pressure. Kral'thar, the Xenthari commander, watched in growing frustration as his forces struggled to adapt. His second-in-command, Vexra, approached him with a plea that echoed the growing desperation among their ranks. "We must retreat," Vexra urged, his voice tinged with fear. "They are breaking us, their endurance, it is unnatural, we cannot sustain this." Kral'thar's response was sharp, his pride refusing to yield. "Retreat is not an option," he snarled. But even as he spoke, doubt crept into his voice, a crack in the facade of invincibility that had defined the Xenthari for a century. The turning point had arrived. Humanity's relentless assault, fueled by their sleepless endurance, had begun to unravel the Xenthari's carefully constructed order. The aliens, once a unified and unstoppable force, now found themselves fractured and faltering. Their morale, once unshakable, began to crumble under the weight of humanity's unyielding will. For the first time, the Xenthari faced an enemy they could not outlast, could not outthink, and could not break. As the tide of the war shifted, Elena's forces pressed their advantage with renewed determination. The Xenthari's fear of humanity's sleepless endurance had grown into something far more dangerous: doubt. And in that doubt, humanity found their greatest weapon. The Siege of New Terra was far from over, but the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. The Xenthari, for all their might, had underestimated the resilience of a species that refused to sleep, refused to tire, and refused to yield. And in that refusal, humanity found their path to victory. As the relentless pressure of humanity's sleepless endurance continued to mount, the once unified Xenthari fleet began to fracture. Dissent spread like wildfire among their ranks, a crack in the foundation of their once impenetrable morale. Elena, ever vigilant, intercepted a desperate transmission between Kral'thar and his superiors. The words were stark, filled with a growing sense of dread. "We cannot sustain this," Kral'thar admitted, his voice strained. "Their endurance, it is unnatural. They do not falter, do not tire, we are losing control." The transmission ended abruptly, but the message was clear: the Xenthari were unraveling. Sensing the tide turning in humanity's favor, Elena gathered her troops for a moment that would define the final stages of the war. Standing before them, her voice carried the weight of a century of struggle and defiance. "They fear us," she began, her tone steady and resolute, "because we are relentless. We are the storm they cannot weather, the night that never ends. Tonight, we show them the true cost of underestimating humanity. Tonight, we break them." Her words ignited a fire in the hearts of her soldiers, a collective resolve that had carried them through the darkest days of the siege. With renewed determination, Elena's forces launched a coordinated assault, targeting the Xenthari's command hubs with surgical precision. The aliens, already stretched thin by humanity's unrelenting attacks, found themselves overwhelmed. Their once orderly fleet descended into chaos as command structures crumbled under the weight of the assault. The Xenthari, unaccustomed to such relentless pressure, began to retreat in disarray, their morale shattered. What had once been a unified force now resembled a scattered, desperate mob, their cohesion lost to the unyielding will of their sleepless enemy. Kral'thar, watching from the bridge of his flagship, could only seethe in frustration. His orders went unanswered, his once loyal subordinates now consumed by fear and doubt. The cracks in his command were no longer hidden, they were gaping wounds, bleeding the strength from his fleet. "We must regroup," he barked, but the words felt hollow even to him. The Xenthari, for all their technological superiority and disciplined precision, had no answer for an enemy that refused to sleep, refused to tire, and refused to yield. As the battle raged on, the fractures within the Xenthari ranks grew deeper. Ships broke formation, commanders abandoned their posts, and the once proud alien fleet began to disintegrate. Elena's forces pressed their advantage, striking with a ferocity that left the Xenthari no room to recover. The aliens, now exhausted and demoralized, could only retreat, their once unshakable confidence reduced to dust. Humanity's sleepless endurance had become their greatest weapon, a force that the Xenthari could neither outlast nor outthink. The Siege of New Terra was far from over, but the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. The Xenthari, once the architects of humanity's near extinction, now faced an enemy they could not comprehend. Their fear of humanity's relentless endurance had grown into something far more dangerous: doubt. And in that doubt, humanity found their path to victory. The storm that had raged for a century was finally beginning to break, and in its wake, the Xenthari's once mighty fleet lay fractured and faltering. The night, it seemed, would belong to humanity after all. As the chaos of the fractured Xenthari fleet reached its peak, Kral'thar made a desperate decision. With his forces crumbling around him, he gathered what remained of his loyal commanders and launched a final, reckless assault on New Terra's central command. It was a last-ditch effort to reclaim the upper hand, a gamble born of desperation and fading hope. The Xenthari flagship, a towering behemoth of alien engineering, surged forward, its weapons blazing as it cut through the remnants of humanity's defenses. Kral'thar, standing on the bridge, his eyes burning with a mix of fury and despair, knew this was his final chance to turn the tide. Elena, monitoring the battlefield from New Terra's command center, saw the flagship's advance and knew what it meant. This was no ordinary attack. It was a personal challenge, a direct confrontation between the two leaders who had shaped the course of the century-long war. Without hesitation, she ordered her forces to intercept the flagship, but she knew this battle would not be won by numbers alone. It would be a clash of wills, a test of endurance that would decide the fate of both species. Boarding a small, agile vessel, Elena set course for the Xenthari flagship, her resolve unshaken. The two ships met in a violent collision, their hulls groaning under the strain as they locked together in a deadly embrace. Elena and her elite strike team stormed the flagship, cutting through the alien defenders with precision and determination. The corridors of the massive ship echoed with the sounds of battle, the air thick with tension and the acrid smell of burning metal. Step by step, Elena pushed forward, her eyes fixed on the bridge where Kral'thar awaited. When she finally reached him, the two leaders stood face to face, the weight of a century of war hanging between them. Kral'thar, his voice a low growl, demanded answers. "How do you endure? What drives you to this madness?" His words were filled with a mix of anger and disbelief, the frustration of a commander who had tried everything and still found himself on the brink of defeat. Elena, her expression cold and unyielding, replied simply, "Survival and the knowledge that you will never break us." Her words were a declaration, a reminder of the unshakable resolve that had carried humanity through its darkest hours. The battle that followed was fierce and unrelenting. Kral'thar, driven by desperation, fought with a ferocity that matched Elena's own. But as the minutes turned to hours, the cracks in his composure began to show. His strikes grew wilder, his movements less precise, while Elena remained steady, her focus unwavering. The tide of the fight shifted, and with a final, decisive blow, Elena disarmed her opponent, leaving him defenseless. Outside the flagship, the battle raged on. Elena's forces, emboldened by her leadership, pressed their advantage, striking at the heart of the Xenthari fleet. The flagship, now crippled and adrift, became a symbol of the aliens' crumbling morale. With a final command, Elena ordered the destruction of the ship, her voice carrying the weight of a century of struggle. The explosion that followed was deafening, a blinding flash of light that illuminated the battlefield and sent shockwaves through the Xenthari ranks. The destruction of the flagship marked the beginning of the end for the Xenthari. Leaderless and demoralized, their once mighty fleet began to retreat in disarray. Ships broke formation, commanders abandoned their posts, and the aliens' once unshakable confidence was reduced to dust. The Siege of New Terra, a century-long nightmare, was finally coming to an end. As the remnants of the Xenthari fleet fled into the void, Elena stood amidst the wreckage of the flagship, her breathing heavy but her spirit unbroken. The cost of victory had been immense, but the message was clear. Humanity would not yield. Their sleepless endurance, their unyielding resolve, had proven to be a force that even the most advanced alien race could not withstand. The storm that had raged for 100 years was finally breaking, and in its wake, humanity stood victorious, a beacon of hope in a cosmos that had tried to extinguish them. The night, it seemed, would belong to humanity after all. As the dust settled over the ruins of New Terra, the air was thick with the weight of victory and loss. Elena Voss stood amidst the wreckage, her gaze sweeping over the shattered remnants of what had once been humanity's last stronghold. The cost of survival had been staggering: lives lost, cities reduced to ash, and a century of unrelenting struggle etched into the very fabric of their existence. Yet as she looked out over the battlefield, there was no doubt in her mind. Humanity had endured. They had faced annihilation and emerged not just alive, but unbroken. A young soldier approached, his face streaked with soot and his eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and awe. "Commander," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "was it worth it?" All of this, Elena turned to him, her expression softening for a moment before she replied, her voice steady and resolute. "We proved something today. Something that will echo across the stars. Even in the face of annihilation, humanity will not yield. We are the storm that never sleeps." Her words carried the weight of 100 years of defiance, a testament to the unyielding spirit that had carried them through the darkest of nights. The young soldier nodded, his shoulders straightening as if her words had reignited a spark within him. Around them, the survivors of New Terra began to gather, their faces a mosaic of relief, sorrow, and quiet pride. They had paid a heavy price, but they had also achieved the impossible. The Xenthari, a race that had once seemed invincible, had been driven back, their morale shattered by humanity's relentless endurance. The legend of their sleepless resilience would spread far and wide, a beacon of hope for any civilization that dared to stand against the tide of despair. As the last remnants of the Xenthari fleet disappeared into the void, a final transmission crackled across the comms. It was faint, distorted by distance and defeat, but the words were unmistakable. "They are not like us," the voice said, trembling with a mix of fear and awe. "They are unstoppable." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving behind a silence that seemed to stretch across the cosmos. It was a silence filled with triumph, but also with the haunting echoes of all that had been lost. Elena turned away from the battlefield, her thoughts drifting to the future. The war was over, but the scars it had left would take generations to heal. Yet, as she looked at the faces of the soldiers and civilians around her, she saw something else, a spark of hope, a determination to rebuild, to carry forward the legacy of those who had fought and fallen. Humanity had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, they could endure, they could rise, and they would never be broken. The story of the 100-year siege would become a legend, a tale told across the stars of a species that refused to sleep, refused to tire, and refused to surrender. It was a story of resilience, of defiance, and of the unyielding will to survive. And as the stars above New Terra began to shine once more, their light seemed to carry a promise that no matter how dark the night, humanity would always find a way to endure. The storm that never sleeps had weathered the siege, and in its wake, a new dawn was rising. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more tales of courage and resilience. Until next time, remember, even in the darkest of times, the human spirit shines brightest.